Good afternoon and welcome on in, all golf fans. Here we are with our round 4 live stream for the ZOZO Championship. Going to break down everything you guys need to know out there for your DFS lineups and your prop slips this evening. You go out there and hopefully finish off this week strong. Got a little coffee here, so welcome on in, whether you're watching this on replay or already in the live stream. Hopefully you're having a fantastic Saturday and are ready to talk some golf for today. Before we go ahead and deep dive all the action for Sunday, I'm going to go ahead and start it off with, first off, our look at our presenting sponsor for the live stream, which are our friends over there with the Ship It Nation, which are a great source for all your needs on DFS, whether it's golf, football, NBA, which started just back up. You've got NHL, NASCAR, UFC going on right now, all covered over there with the Ship It Nation crew. And if you use code Luke10 when you're signing up over there, you'll get a discount off any membership. So if you aren't already a part of the Ship It Nation crew, make sure to take advantage of that discount right there. Help support the channel. Let them know that you're going over there and using my code, and make sure to take advantage of that if you haven't already. But we're going to go ahead and hop on over here to the golf side and talk through what we're going to see here for Sunday. So first and foremost, golf course played pretty easy out there for Saturday. In fact, in terms of scoring average, the course has only gotten easier as the week has gone on. So played about 0.87 under par out there on Thursday. Round 2, 1.12 under par. But they did get a rainstorm out there on Friday afternoon. So Saturday, with a softer golf course, you saw them get after it a little bit. So it wasn't so much that you had a cut line or anything like that. That might lead to a higher talent level of guys playing on Saturday, Sunday. This was more so course conditions wise. So, and if you split this by the waves, you can see that the AM wave played quote unquote 1.6 shots easier, but a lot of that is sample size. We've got a much smaller field than what we're used to. And if we sort this by score on round 3, you'll see that a lot of your outlier performances were players that had a later tee time, most notably a Chris Gotterup that completely screwed up a lot of the scoring averages. So I haven't been looking at the scoring averages that much over here on Data Golf, as the more susceptible to noise on a week with only 78 players. And you especially saw that out there in round number 3. In terms of your weather forecast, though, it looks a little dicey there towards the latter half of the afternoon. But because they're going off relatively early in the day, and once again, threesomes off of holes 1 and holes number 10, they're going to get play-in before a lot of this rain comes through. So the winds are pretty much non-existent like they have been the first 3 days. They're capping out about 6, maybe 7 miles an hour right before that storm comes through. And your temperatures are in the mid to lower 70s for much of the mid to latter half of the afternoon. When your leaders will be playing most of their round. So perfect weather, maybe slightly harder pins than what we had for round 3. They call it moving day for a reason. They want there to be quite a bit of scoring out there on Saturday on the PGA Tour. So I would expect the scoring average to maybe get slightly harder out there on Sunday, not only as you have the harder locations, but also as the course starts to dry up a little bit. So the weather's not going to lead it to any harder scoring. It's going to be perfect out there once again. But I think the setup, then the course getting a little bit drier, could potentially lead to some harder scoring. So we're going to have to circle back on that when we talk about the props here in just a little bit. But before we do that, I'm going to go through everything over here on Draftkings. So I'm going to go ahead, share our screen. If you guys have any specific questions about a player, now is the perfect time for it. I saw a few people in the community had a really solid day out there on Saturday. A few people with near takedowns. I saw a 7x ROI and 8x ROI out there for the community. So hopefully you guys were able to take advantage yourselves. Especially with Sanjay M going absolutely nuclear. But we'll go through a few more players out here for Sunday. Once again, disclaimer on these plays. It's not so much to give you guys a player pool out there for your lineups, but more so to give you some insight, a little peek into my process and what I'm looking for out there in players. And because we don't have a massive weather edge, meant to mention that out there with the weather, because it is tee times off of holes number 1 and 10, we're not going to have anything to really squeeze out of that. So what I'm more so looking for out here on Sunday is playing that game theory edge. And you know, you can always make the case for fading a lot of that chalk. For example, a Justin Thomas, an Accordia, a Grazerman, really anyone that is minus 10 or better are all going to be at least 20% owned. And if they're not 20%, maybe they're a 6-7K range player and they're closer to like 15 to 18% if they're that far down the board. almost all of those players, you can make a massive argument for fading because they're 4 to 5 times higher owned than the peers. So, for example, I know Justin Thomas on here is blacked out. Of course, guys, these are my Patreon projections where I've got my player pool projections, ownership out there for every single player. I know this is blacked out. It's not blacked out over there on the Patreon version, but Justin Thomas is over 50% owned out there for round 4 showdown. So part of that is because of the placement points in play, which matter. You're especially in large field GPPs where you need the absolute nuts to take something down. You're going to have to get placement points at least 1, maybe even 2 positions. So guys like a Justin Thomas are going to be royally overowned in those kind of contests. Guys like him, Echeverria, Grazeman, all the guys starting up there in the top 5, top 10. And in single entries, smaller field stuff where you don't have to have the absolute nuts, I think the key to this round 4 showdown, the way that I'm choosing to play it, might be fading a lot of that chalk because this is a scoreable course. It's not an easy golf course by any means. Like if you get out of line here, you're going to be absolutely punished for it. And if you're playing under pressure, you tend to have a lot more misses off the tee. So I think we might see some scrappy golf from some of the leaders out there this afternoon. But if you're in play, you're playing without pressure, you're hitting a lot of fairways out there, you see -6, -7 rounds like you've seen for all the first 3 days. And because it's perfect weather out there, I think if you're playing in stuff where you don't have to have the absolute nuts, that you can make an argument for fading guys like JT, like in a smaller field GPP, maybe a single entry kind of contest. Because guys like Xander, guys like Hideki, if you take a look at their pure fantasy point projection, project just as well, if not better than Justin Thomas, even though they're starting like 10 strokes back. So, for example, Xander is more expensive than Justin Thomas, but in terms of raw fantasy point projection, he's a higher fantasy point projection than Justin Thomas. So, if you can afford the extra $1,000, it's going to cost you get up there to $11,300. But if you can afford to do so, you're getting a higher fantasy point projection. So what I go through all of that to say is that the placement points matter. But I think especially so out there in the large field GPPs where you have to have the absolute nuts. In contests where you don't have to have the nuts, I really like some pivots off of that chalk. So because I'm going more single entry heavy, I did not like the large field GPPs for round 4 showdown. I usually like playing in those contests, particularly if the payout structure is anything remotely close to what it should be. But what we have out there for today's action is just not the best. So what I chose to do was go with some closer to like $50, $100 single entries. I went with like 5 or 6 of those. So I'm keeping my player pool a little bit tighter than what it normally would be because I'm not entering nearly as many lineups. And because I know the kind of contest that I'm going after, it's not really that same large field GPP. I'm really leaning into that game theory, as I mentioned, because I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to have the perfect set of 6 players to go out there and take something down. What I'm more so worried about out there in my lineups is game theory. I'm taking advantage of some leverage in all 6 spots, but on top of that, also just optimizing projection, right? Just making sure I'm getting some of the best players in the field. And I think that no one better represents that than Xander Schauffele up there at $11,300. So let me catch up on chat, say hi to anyone that's down there, and then we'll talk through some of these plays. What's going on, Jordan? What's going on, Antonio? If you guys have any questions, just let me know, but hopefully you guys are vibing out here on a Saturday. So Xander's been playing solid golf since his blunder out there on Thursday. So I'm riding that momentum, have the last 2 days. So why not run it out one more time out there on Sunday? You're getting a fraction of the ownership that you'd be playing out there in Justin Thomas. The only downside is that he's $11,300. So whether it's him, a Morikawa, a Hideki Matsuyama, you can see is the next play who we're going to talk through here. If you're taking anyone but a Justin Thomas, Sahith would be the same sort of play. They're going to get you infinite leverage towards the top end of the board. So if I was playing in a single entry, I would be highly considering getting off Justin Thomas because I've got him at about 50% in GPPs, but in some higher dollar single entries, he might be closer to like 65 to 80% ownership. So if you've got the balls to go out there and fade somebody like JT, then maybe it'll work out. And what I'll say about him is, yeah, I'm not using him in any lineups out there for Sunday. I'm a huge fan of Justin Thomas, so it's partially a little bit of a life hedge out there against my fandom. If he goes out there, wins, smashes out there on Sunday, not only will my main slate exposure be just fine, as I have a ton out there for main slate, as you guys know, right? I talked about it out there in the Wednesday live stream, but I'm also a massive fan, right? If he goes out there and wins, I am not going to be that disappointed about it. However, I've seen this story before, right? Guys that have crushed it for rounds 1 through 3, even star players like JT that have done it in a very sustainable fashion. And then on Sunday, it's not even like they play horribly, but if he shoots -2, -3, that might not be enough to win. In fact, -3 rounds probably not enough to win. And considering that he's $10,300, that might not be enough scoring to go out there and make the optimal either, because for finishing in like 3rd place, you get some placement points, but it's like the equivalent of 1 birdie. So, for example, if a Morikawa, a Xander, any of these other players, Hideki Thagala, any of them go out there and they're making 6, 7 birdies, guess who you're going to have in the large field GPP? You're going to have one of those kind of players. So I'm fading him, and I'll just go completely on the record of saying that regardless of the contest that you're entering, because these other guys around him, they're the same, if not better players that are like 4 times lower owned out there in some cases. So it's unfortunate if he goes out there and wins. I already told you guys, I'm not going to be that disappointed. But from the game theory perspective, I think that there's a really good argument for avoiding my guy, JT. Hideki Matsuyama is an example of a player I'm taking out there as a pivot. His putter had been ice cold rounds 1 and 2, but then round 3 got things working in his favor. So it's why the scoring went from very pedestrian out there days 1 and 2 to one of the better rounds out there all of yesterday. So he's -2 overall, very, like I said, average at best start over the first 3 rounds, but he's only 10.2% owned out there in GPPs. So if you're looking for leverage off a 50+% owned Justin Thomas, you can go up to $11,000 and take a Xander. But if you're trying to be a little bit more balanced with your salary, Hideki Matsuyama could be a potential option, or potentially even going down into this 9K range. Speaking of the 9K range, the next play I want to point out would be a slightly chalkier option down here with Eric Cole. He's at -9, so he's starting up there towards the top end of the board. And if he has a ceiling round, which realistically is probably at least -4 out there for this kind of slate, if he shoots -4 or better, that's likely going to result in at least a top 10 finish, if not something close up there to the top 5. If he has a really good performance, something like -5, -6, that's almost for sure going to be a top 5 finish. So he's got that placement point potential. So if you're playing in those large field GPPs, he does give you at least that kind of aspect going on. But because he's not mega chalk, like he's not -10 or better, like some of the other guys here, like a Kurt Kitayama, for example, he's not quite over that 20% ownership mark. And I think I mentioned him yesterday as a potential play because of his approach play the first few rounds. Continued that, just could not make a putt for his life out there round 3. So hopefully he can get that to turn out there Sunday. Kitayama, he's $9,100. He continues to be maybe the best tee to green player that we've seen for all of the fall swing. He's $9,100. He's -10. So just like Eric Cole is on the precipice of being in that top 10, top 5. I've only got him at 15.7%. Part of that is because of Grazerman right here, soaking up a ton of ownership, but also because there's guys like a Sanjay who's underpriced, also at -8. He's lurking on the leaderboard. You've got guys like a JJ Spawn, Siwoo Kim, who I've got a little bit over 10% owned. So because there's enough names in this range to draw away eyes, I've only got Kurt Kitayama at just under 16%. So if you play him in like 30% of lineups, that's just about the 2x leverage that a lot of people are looking for. In the $9,100 price tag for somebody that I loved heading into the week, if I'm going to play somebody at slightly higher ownership, now 16% isn't anything drastic. He's not mega chalky like a Max Grazerman would be, who's, I believe, a little bit over 30% out there in my projections. I'll play Kurt Kitayama because he was already somebody I had my eye on this week and has been playing beautiful golf in terms of his shots gained tee to green. Doug Gim, another player that I bet outright this week, so already have been eyeing him for most of this golf tournament. Shots gained tee to green stats have been what you'd expect from Doug Gim, both gaining off the tee and with his approach play. He's 12.5% owned, so he's not completely under-owned over here in the 8K range. But at the same time, you play him in 25, 30% of lineups. That's your 2x leverage that you're looking for, as I said. And $8,600, this is the kind of range where maybe you take a slightly chalkier guy like Eric Cole Kitayama that are getting close to 20%. Pretty much anyone you play in this 10K range is going to be at least 10% ownership. Let's say for the sake of this, that maybe you're starting with JT. Maybe you don't have the stones to go out there and fade them. So you're starting with a real chalky piece up top. This 8K range is a real good spot to take somebody that is sub 15% and try and start to get different. So, a Doug Gim, I think a Minwoo Lee here at 12.3% would be a really good example of that sort of player where you're getting leverage, but you're not crazy with this leverage. Like Minwoo Lee doesn't have the most placement point potential, but he's vastly underpriced for the kind of birdie or better upside that he has. So I'll go right back to the well. He had, I believe, 6 birdies out there in round number 3. Doug Gim, somebody I bet outright this week, he's at the kind of portion of the leaderboard where if he shoots -5, -6, which is what we're looking for out there with a play out here Sunday, if he can do that, that might not be a top 5, but it's probably a top 10 finish. If he goes out there and shoots -5, -6, that's totally fine at 12.5% ownership. So I'm not taking a lot of the mega chalk here, right? Like, for example, Max Grazerman is a complete fade for me out there Sunday. And, if you're going to look at guys like a Taylor Moore, a Ricky Fowler, a Johnny Vegas, or an Andrew Novak, like you see down here with our next play, you got to really look at the shots gain metrics and make sure that you love them, because you're going to have to play them in 25 to 30, maybe even 40% of lineups with some of the really chalky players to go out there and get your leverage. So make sure you like them if you're going to go out there and include them. Next up, we got Andrew Novak here. So he's $7,800. He's -9, 10.8% owned, which I actually think is very reasonable for the kind of play that he is. Part of that is because you got a Sam Stevens there, Johnny Vegas, Ricky Fowler, who I already mentioned as people are getting to, a CT Pan cheaper, also a Kevin Yu here at -11. So there are enough plays down here in the mid to top into the 7K range to take away ownership from Novak. And Novak heading into this week was playing the best of all these players when it came to their approach play. This week, that has continued. His tee to green play has been very consistent from round to round. I believe he's top 10 in all the tee to green categories. And at $7,800, he's -9, so the score isn't popping all that much. But he's at that portion of the leaderboard where -4, -5, that's probably close to a top 5 finish, and he's only 10% owned. So I think that there's a lot of guys in this range, Johnny Vegas included. He's close to that 10 to 13% ownership range, where they're getting some steam, but in my opinion, not enough, because the shots gained metrics check out. They were already solid plays heading into the week, and they're right on that precipice of getting those top 5 placement points. So if you're playing in large field GPPs, like you've got the guys like Grazerman, JT, Echevarria, especially there at -17, that I think a lot of your casuals are going to use going after placement points. I prefer these guys at like -9, who they're much lower owned. They're 2-3 times lower owned than some of those other super chalky guys towards the very top of the leaderboard. And those guys at the very top, they've still got to shoot very low. Like even if they win, right? If those guys starting at like -15 or better go out there and win, if they only shoot like -3 and win, that might not even matter. You've got to shoot at least -4, -5 for that to mean a rat's ass, which is why I like these guys at -9, because there are many outcomes where those top level guys just kind of spin their wheels, right? The guy that wins just kind of has a decent round, goes out there and shoots like -2, -3. If that happens, you might just want a lot of these guys starting at -8 to -10, which is why we're pointing out so many of them here. Next up, we got Ben Griffin starting at -3. So I'm not even worried about placement points with this kind of player. He's sub 5% owned. So that's what you get with somebody starting at that kind of score. And $7,400 for a player that was closer to $8,000 heading into this week is, I think, another reason that you might want to get to him yourself. Patrick Fishburne, same kind of play. He starts at -3, so placement points kind of out of the question, but is sub 5% owned as well, so has that going for him. And a play that all this fall swing has been playing some of his best golf of his career, a lot of made cuts, few weeks ago was like 30% owned, over 10 grand at one of these fall series events. So now he's $7,200. He's 4.4% owned. Like, yeah, if you need some real leverage, potentially if you're using a Justin Thomas towards the top end of the board, these kind of players can get that done for you. A lot of that leverage in offsetting a mega chalky player. Mark Hubbard is a slightly higher owned player, but still under 10%. That I'd be using out there in GPPs. He has momentum going from his really good round 3 performance, made a bunch of birdies. If you went out there and used him in Showdown, which he was a part of my player pool, of course, out there for my lineups. He's a -4, so you're not going to get those top 5, top 10 placement points, but he has the kind of birdie or better potential, and this is why I used him rounds 2 and 3, is he's a top 25 birdie or better percentage player in this field that is priced way, way down the board. So like if you compare him to all the other guys in this range, he blows them away when it comes to just pure birdie or better firepower, right? Who goes out there and makes the most birdies or better per round, and that generates to a lot of fantasy scoring. So if you look at, for example, Draftkings fantasy score per round, he's got the highest fantasy points per round of anyone out there in the bottom end of the 7K range. So -4, 8.6% ownership, like in a vacuum, just one of the best points per dollar plays that you can take on the slate. These are the guys that I'm prioritizing out there in my lineups, not so much like who's starting in the top 5. That's the difference in my strategy compared to a lot of the casuals out there for round 4 Showdown. Playing some Carson Young as well, -5, so not really in play for a lot of placement points, but you're getting extremely low ownership at just 2.6%. But if you take a look at the shots gained metrics over there on Data Golf, any of the databases, over here from rounds 1 through 3, he's in the top 5 when it comes to shots gained approach. And a lot of the other guys in the top 5 for shots gained approach are in the top 5 to top 10 of the actual tournament. So Carson Young, the one real outlier, if you take a look at the shots gained approach stats, but he is super low owned. So if you're looking for somebody to offset some ownership, could fit that kind of role. And then the last player would be a Joel Damon here. His round 1 really throws off his shots gained metrics. He's only $6,400, also sub 5% owned. But rounds 2, round 3, posted solid scores, both well under par out there for Friday and Saturday. So if you're going to go to him in round 4, you're getting a player that has momentum heading in. 2 solid rounds in a row doesn't guarantee that he's going to have 3 in a row. But what you get here is a player that shots gain metrics, particularly from tee to green, have checked out over the first 3 days. And that even includes the horrible round 1 performance where he lost in all 4 categories. If you take a look at his shots gained over the first 3 rounds, he's gaining in every category but the putter. But if you take a look at just rounds 2 and 3, he's well into the positive in all 3 tee to green categories, and then right about a neutral out there with the shots gained putting. So very favorable, very sustainable shots gained metrics there for days 2 and 3. So hopefully round 1 was maybe a little bit of, I don't know, travel sickness, right? Getting used to the time zones. Maybe Joel Damon had a few too many brewskis out there while traveling to Japan. Either way, I like what I've seen out there since Friday, and at $6,400, he's an example of some leverage you can get towards the bottom end of the board. So that's going to be it for the highlighted plays. Once again, disclaimer out here on these live streams. It's not so much to give you guys players to go out there and 100% use yourself, but to give you a glimpse into my process and what I'm looking for in players. If you happen to agree with any of my takes on anyone, or maybe looking at somebody anyways before I mention them, obviously feel free to go ahead and use them in your lineups. But just because I point them out here does not mean that you have to use them in your builds, right? Make sure that the checking out in your process, your projections are grading them highly, et cetera, et cetera. But what I more so want you guys to take away is what I'm looking for in players so that you can replicate that out there for future slates yourself. So let me see if there's any questions in the chat. Let me get a sip of my coffee here. And I'm looking forward to props. I haven't entered anything for props yet, but we're going to change that here in the live stream. So Antonio has a matchup for us. Looks like it's Decky versus Colin. And you're asking for my thoughts, you're saying? And you're saying you're shocked that Decky is the dog? So I would say that he probably should be the dog just because of like the shots gained distribution of each player. Colin Morikawa gains strokes to the field in almost every single event that he plays. Like, in fact, do I have my projections up still? I do, right? Yeah, let me actually go to the other tab, bring up Data Golf, and go through Colin Morikawa's stat profile. It is eerie how much he gains. In fact, if you go down his stat profile, it's at least the last like 15, maybe even close to like 20 events for Colin Morikawa since he's lost strokes to the field in any event. So some of them PG Tour events, most of them are 3-4 majors included in that sample size. The Olympics, the one really non-PGA Tour event that you're looking over those 20 events. But then if you look at Hideki, this is why he'd be the underdog. Look at Hideki's stat profile. It's pretty good, but then he's lost twice, for example, over his last 6 events. So he's just not as consistent. But this week, I agree with your assessment there. You said that Colin looks a little bit off. I agree with that. So I would lean Hideki, especially at plus money, but I get why the lines makers have the line where they do. A lot of it just comes down to what we've seen this year. What am I doing with more disappointing round yesterday? All the talent in the world, but looks like he's thinking too much. He's young. He has won before, and he's looked like the absolute nuts out there on Sunday. Either time that he's gone out there and snatched an event, it has been from behind, starting from like 4 or 5 shots back, and him going out there and shooting like -7, -8, whether it's on the PGA Tour, Korn Ferry Tour, way back in the day. So I would say if you're going to buy Taylor Moore, the time wasn't yesterday when he had a lead or was up there towards the lead. It's now that he's a few shots further back. So if history has told us anything about Taylor Moore, I would say that he's in a better situation to thrive today than what he was yesterday. And am I playing Nico? No joke, his irons are Scotty level. Yeah, the stats look really good. He's the eye test also would check that, but no, I'm not. He's too much of an unknown commodity for me, so I'm going to stay away for now. Let's pick up DraftKings. Let's build a lineup together. If you guys have any other questions for DFS, go ahead and let me know down there in the live chat. But out here for Sunday, we have to consider a few different things compared to rounds 1 through 3. Placement points being the one major difference. But as I mentioned towards the beginning of our DFS section, depending on the contest you're entering, I don't know if they mean all that much out there for Sunday. This was a scoreable enough golf course, a birdie average over 4 per round, where a ceiling performance, getting 6, 7 plus birdies out there in the scorecard is far more important than going out there and finishing top 5, top 10. It's not the US Open where those 4 or 5 points right there are going to make or break the slate. Like if you're playing in the large field GPP, they actually matter a little bit more, in my opinion, just because if somebody goes out there that's towards the lead and shoots like -7, -8, nukes the slate, goes out there and wins, you're going to have that guy to win the large field GPP because you're playing against enough entries where you're going to get pretty close to the nuts that takes down that contest. So in those kind of builds, you're probably going to want to include a few guys towards the top end of the board because if somebody goes out there and does that, you have to have them out there in your lineup, right? Single entry, maybe even a GPP, but like something that's a little bit smaller. You don't necessarily have to have that player to take it down because you don't have to beat as many people. It might not take the nuts. They go out there and finish in first place. So that's where I lean towards more game theory, going out there, getting off a Justin Thomas, an Echeverria, a Grazeman, all of those guys that are going to be like 30 to 50% owned. That's what I'm playing. I'm playing a lot of single entries. I'm playing a lot of that smaller field stuff because 1, I can play that game theory component, and 2, the large field GPP sucked when it came to their payout structure. So what we're going to do here for this lineup is I'm going to throw in a Hideki as my first man in. He's only $10,000. I was going to say Xander, but he's 11-3. It does kind of screw us when it comes to the salary down low. Our second man in, I'm going to take a Kurt Kitayama here. So he's starting in 7th place. He's definitely got the placement point potential, but he's not as mega chalky as some of the guys starting in the top 5. So though he's right about 20%, a little bit under that when it comes to his projected ownership, he's at least not going to be a 30-40%er that we had to worry about there. Our third man in, we're going to go down here to the 8K range, and we're going to try and find some leverage with this play. So I would say I like a Fowler, but he might be a little bit too popular for this kind of play. A Hoey could be in play, a Minwoo Lee, a Tom Hoagie are all guys that we could use in this kind of spot. And even if we wanted to push it and perhaps take a Ricky Fowler, we could get away with that too. But just for the sake of this, I am going to make sure that we're differentiating out here with this third man in. And we're going to throw in a Minwoo Lee there at $8,400. So Placement point potential isn't really there with somebody starting at T51, but as I've already stated a few times, that is not our main focus out here for our round 4 showdown. We're going to use an Andrew Novak here. He's got some ownership going to him, but he's kind of like a Kitayama. He's not mega chalky despite his starting position on the leaderboard. T8 is a very good place to be starting heading into round 4. So let's throw him in there. Shots gain metrics have been checking out as well. So it does give us some of that placement point potential, but our ownership with these top 4 players is pretty different. And even if we were like average to above average ownership with our last 2 players here, we would probably be okay. But we're going to push the line even more just to try and get even more of that leverage into this lineup. So I'm going to throw in, rather than taking like a Kevin Yu, an Echeverria, that would really pump up the ownership of this lineup. We're going to make sure to be responsible with who we're playing here. So a CT Pan would be in play, even though he's like 10% owned. That would be responsible enough with the ownership level. A Gary Woodland, I believe he's at like 7 to 8% ownership. He's right around the exact ownership number that I'm looking for. And Andrew Putnam is a little bit lower than that, so he would definitely fit this kind of lineup as well. We're going to go with Woodland just because I bet him heading into this week. I thought this was a really good tournament for him. Obviously not the outcome I was hoping for with T29. Not a terrible week, but not the kind of great week that I thought he had in him out here for this kind of event. So $7,700. He doesn't have the most placement point potential, but that's not our main focus. But starting T29, if he shoots -6, -7, that might be a top 5. I mean, it's probably a top 10. It might even be a top 5 if he really goes out there and gets after it. So now we have $7,000 remaining for our last man in. This lineup's ownership I feel really good about. So like even if I took a chalky last man in, you'd probably get away with it. But just for the sake of keeping that game theory edge going, if you threw in like a Silverman, a Mark Hubbard, I believe I have both of those players in my player pool out here for Sunday. They would make a whole lot of sense out here to round out this kind of lineup. So this is the kind of lineup that I'm going with. Doesn't necessarily have to be the same kind of lineup construction that you are. Even if you're playing a Justin Thomas, even if you're using guys like Echeverria, Grazerman, that chalk that we've already outlined, a Kevin Yu, you can throw into that picture. Same thing with a Ricky Fowler. If you're using any of these super chalky popular players out there for Sunday, just be responsible about it, right? Don't use all 4 of them in the same lineup, for example. It'd be really easy to, by the way, because of how cheap some of them are. You don't want to do that out there with your total ownership, your product ownership, all of that. If you're using 1, maybe even 2 of those players out there in a lineup, just make sure you have 1 or 2 guys that are sub 5%. They go out there and offset that ownership. So it's not my favorite way to build, but I guess if you're going to play in like the big lottery contests out there for round 4, you might have to include somebody towards the top end of the board. So if you're going to do so, just do so responsibly. Make sure to get some leverage to try to offset that. But it's all I've got for the DFS section, guys. If you guys have any questions, feel free to go ahead and throw those down in live chat still. But we're going to go ahead, turn our focus over there to props, where Underdog or Prize Picks have got our name on it, and hopefully some profit that we can grind out once again. Our slip that we went over for yesterday's stream ended up going out there. It's smacking rather easily. So let's go out there, try and run it back out there for round 4, and hopefully make it another profitable slate there. But if you guys are just here for DFS, I still appreciate you guys stopping by as usual. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. But if you guys have any questions, have anything that I wasn't able to get to quite yet, feel free to go ahead, chirp my ear down there in the live chat. But let me bring up Draftkings. I also want to take a peek at the pins. I haven't done that quite yet, and I don't have any exposure in on the prop sites. Underdog didn't have anything quite up before we ended up getting to the live stream here, but we're gonna fix that here on this live stream. So let me bring up those pins as I was mentioning before, and let's get this thing rolling, shall we? Alrighty, so we're gonna start with the pin locations. Before we go through the stat averages, all of that kind of jazz, we're not going to do a full deep dive, but just going through these pins, some of them look rather generous. Like 17 is not tucked by any means. 9, same thing, and that is a very generous pin location on what can be a difficult hole. But holes like 5, it's a tough par 3. It's tucked over there just over the water. to the left hole. There are 2 greens for hole number 5 that they're using this week. So you can see that they have the left one in play out there for round 4. That's a pretty tough pin location, but like 2, that's not that protected. That's a pretty gettable pin location. 3, same thing. 4, especially, that one is wide open and for the taking. And then even ones like 7 and 8, like even the average pin locations that you have on this sheet aren't tricky. Like the only real tricky pin locations that I see, 5, 16 kind of stand out. But yeah, that's about it. Like maybe 14, because it's 5 paces from the right. It's already, kind of tricky hole. That's all I'll say about this pin sheet, is that it looks pretty similar to round 3. It's going to be a little harder because it is round 4 as opposed to moving day. But outside of hole 5, nothing really stands out like, oh, that's the Sunday pin that they're going to go with for this golf course. Like the closest that we're getting to the edge of any green is 4 paces. And you see that in a lot of cases, like 1, 6, 7, 12. Like there's countless examples of a hole being 4 paces from the side, but it's never 4 paces from the side and then tucked just over the front edge. Like, I mean, hole 1's a great example. You have 9 paces to work with. Hole 7, you've got 10 paces to try and run the ball close to it. 6, it's in that back little corner, but you've got at least 7, 8 paces there to get the ball close to that hole. I don't know. It doesn't look that intimidating to me. So what I'll say about that, if we take a peek at these scoring averages, round 3, it did get a tad bit easier, as you would expect out there on moving day. Played about 1.9 under par, birdie average 4.3 per round. Bogey average went down a little bit to about 2.18 per round. So you can see the Eurogolf stuff at the bottom. We'll circle back to that when we take a look at the Eurogolf board. But we're going to start with PGA. So I was taking a peek before we got on live stream here. I was not that pleased to see a lot of these guys at 4.5 birdies. I was kind of hoping that they'd go with the same kind of pricing that they had for round 3, where guys like a Minwoo were down there at 4 birdies. I took his over at 4 birdies and hit the over out there for round 3. But now a lot of those guys are up there at 4.5. And if we take a look at the strokes board, they've got the strokes board about a stroke lower, maybe even a stroke and a half lower on some cases, compared to where they had it round 3. So I haven't had quite a chance yet to take a look at these sportsbook odds, but I have to imagine that they're at least a stroke higher. So you can see here with Max Homa, he's at 68.5. He is juiced under, but he's at 67.5 over there on Prize Picks. Hideki Matsuyama, he's at 66.5, but he is minus 160 towards the over. So you can see he's at 67. So they've accounted for that, but not really any sort of line value that you can squeeze out there. Morikawa, he's minus 130 for his over. He is at 66.5. So, they're not that far off the sportsbook odds, but if anything, they're a little bit lower than they should be. So, like, for example, CT Pan is at 68 strokes. He's at 68.5 over there on the sportsbook. So, yeah, CT Pan, there he is, down there at 68 strokes. If you're going to play unders on strokes, you're not going to find a lot of value here, is what I'm saying. So if you take a look at Eric Cole, for example, like he's 67.5. He's getting the same kind of treatment as a Max Homa is. He's at 68.5 on books. Sure, he's juiced under, same thing as what we had in the other case, but that's an entire stroke discrepancy. So, it's not like I think that there's a ton of value on taking these overs, but in most cases, especially if you can find somebody that is mispriced, whether it's form, course fit around Narashino Country Club, that there's probably going to be some fades to play out here for round 4. So I played some fades out there for round 3, and it worked out in almost every case that I went with. You guys know about the CT Pan fade that we talked about the live stream yesterday, but I also faded, Hostler over on strokes. And we didn't miss any of the fades that we mixed in. So I'm not against doing so. And that was with easy conditions, right? It played the easiest that it had the entire week, and we didn't miss a fade that we ended up going with. So just to think through, kind of brainstorm this a little bit. Like, we know that Eric Cole, he would have been juiced towards the over. But let's see if we have a Will Zalatoris prop that we can look at. Antonio, by the way, asked the important questions here. Who's winning this? sometimes the simplest questions are the best ones. If I had to just take a guess, right, take a name out of a bucket, I'd say Justin Thomas. He's the most proven player up there. He's also got arguably the most sustainable shots gained profile because he's not gaining a bunch of the putter. Tee to green is where he's making all of his hay, particularly on approach. Like he's got the best irons of anyone in the field. So, logic would say Justin Thomas, but let's look at this leaderboard. Like, I don't want to be lame, right, and just give you the cop out answer. So if we're gonna take GT out of that conversation, the fan in me wants to say Ricky. Ricky's been playing sneakily good with his tee to green play the last few events. So I wouldn't be mind blown. If he could find a magical putter, he could win this golf tournament. Grazerman, he's been close so many times the last few months, 2 times towards the end of last season. So it kind of feels like he's due for a win. So yeah, if we're going to go non-JT, I'm going to say Grazerman. He's only starting 3 off the lead, so that's not that crazy. If you want to go slightly further back, Fowler or big true dark horse would be Andrew Novak. And the only reason I say that with Andrew Novak is because he's been hitting the ball unbelievably well in approach for a long time now, not even just this week. All right, so let's get back to this prop board. So I want to see if we have any Will Zalatoris odds. I don't think we had anything posted, but I do want to double check on that. And I also want to look at some of the leaders. So like Echeverria, he's at 69 strokes, I believe. Yeah, over here on Prize Picks. So Kitayama's at 67.5, and he is slightly juiced towards the under. Johnny Vegas is at the same number, but he is juiced minus 165 over. I don't see anything for Zalatoris, which is kind of annoying because I was hoping to be able to bet on him for an over, but you don't always get what you want, as they say. Okay, yeah, still nothing on Zalatoris. Let's go over here to Caesars. Maybe they'll get us. And yeah, it looks like a lot of the same. And the numbers from what I can see on these books are all rather consistent based on what I've seen so far. Like JT, based on sportsbook line value, might be the best bet that we have on here. So he was minus 140 over there on Caesars. Let me see what his line is over here on FanDuel. Right, where are you at, Justin? There he is. He's minus 130, minus 125 for his under. Okay. So not that much of a lean. And then what was he over here on DraftKings? He was minus 135 out there towards his under. So if you're looking at sportsbook line value, this JT under wouldn't be the worst bet. Like if you're going to take any of these unders at 67.5, like he'd be by far the best one I think that you could take. But some of these other lower tier players, like I was looking at this Zalatoris over, just because his form's been a little bit sketchy recently. I think the scoring average is going to be at best like a 68 scoring average. I was trying to find some potential overs, but we didn't have the sportsbook line to look at. So let's throw that on the back burner. Let's see what we got. So in terms of birdie lines, we do have a few posted over here on FanDuel. So Colin is at 5.5. He is juiced under though. But guys that are at 4.5, a Hideki is minus 175 towards the over. You've got JT at 4.5 and he's juiced over. Who else? Ricky at 4.5 and he's juiced under 4.5. Okay. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's good to know at least. Sahith at 4.5 and he's minus 165 over. That makes a lot more sense. And then, yeah, Xander the whole way up at 5.5, but he's juiced way towards the under. So that's good to know. And then I want to see if Underdog posted anything because they did post stuff for round 3 that actually ended up being different than the Prize Picks board. So I guess they manned up. They tried to post something that was a little bit different, not just copy and pasting what they had on Prize Picks. And they made a lot of mistakes. They posted some real shitty props. So let's see if they do the same thing. So just going through this, it looks pretty much the exact same. I might be overlooking something that's different, but if so, just let me know down in the chat. That would be great. Yeah, the strokes lines are what I'm primarily looking at. And I think they're the exact same for all the ones that I've looked at so far. Is CT Pan at 4 birdies? Yeah, he is. Over there on Prize Picks. Yeah, this board looks pretty much copy and pasted, but what we got closer to lock, we still have like 4 or 5 hours until these guys are teeing off. Is that they posted like par or better lines. They might post birdie lines out there for a few extra players that were really good value comparatively compared to Prize Picks. So if you're on the Patreon page, obviously you can get all the projections that you found from the DFS section that has a player pool, all the ownership out there for every single player. But for every single prop slip that I end up getting to, you can check that out as well. So unfortunately, between Prize Picks and Underdog, we're not going to have a ton of different selection to get to, but I don't know, at least good to know that if we want to anti-correlate something to try and get a better payout, we can do it over here on this site and get a slightly better payout. And what I mean by that, by the way, is that you took like an over on strokes and then an under on strokes, you're going to get a 3.24x payout. You do the same thing on Prize Picks. You know, for as much shit as I'll give Underdog, you at least get a better payout in that kind of situation. So there'll only be 3x over there on Prize Picks. So it's good to know that we at least have that option in our back pocket. But let's start over here on Prize Picks, as they're the one to post their board first. They're not the ones to plagiarize and just rip off their competition. So to go through this, I kind of did like this over on Will Zalatoris. Getting to -3 is going to be tough for anybody, but especially somebody that's been a little bit sketchy with his form over the first few days. Just to show you that what we're talking about there, if we go over here to the shots gained metrics, and then bring up Zalatoris, you'll see that he's losing on approach, losing around the green. I don't worry about the around the green as much, but he hasn't done anything special the entire event. And outside of round 3, which was actually pretty good for him, which was almost all his shots gained putting. I mean, round 2 +1, dreadful on approach. Round 1, dreadful on approach, right? Ended up losing with the putter. Round 3, the only time he's done anything worth a rat's ass was completely carried by something that he hardly ever does well, right? He's not the best shots gained putting player out there on the PGA Tour. He's got a very unsteady stroke. We know his issues out there with the flat stick. So in terms of a fade, that's why I was initially drawn to that, because he's just, I don't know, he's not playing terrible golf. It's not like he's bleeding 4 or 5 shots gained per round, but he's also not playing very efficient golf either. Like it looks like it's a little bit forced. It looks like he has to really hold on to the steering wheel a little bit so it doesn't get offline. So let's go ahead and throw that over in. Let's look at these birdie or better lines. So at 4.5, that is slightly over the field average. Field average, by the way, was 4.3 per round if you guys are just joining us. So there could be some potential fades at 4.5, but players that are posted down at 4 could be an over, in 3.5, especially like for somebody like a Charlie Hoffman. So I don't know if Hoffman is playing solid golf enough for us to like really consider that fully, but let's see. So if we take a look at rounds 1 through 3, you know, he's been about average in all 4 stat categories. If we take a look at what he's actually done, he would have covered that out there in round number 3. He would have hooked round 2, and then he would have gone over by 0.5 out there in round number 1. So, you know, he's gone over in 2 of 3, but not very convincing despite his play there rounds 1 through 3. He is at T61 and he's covered in 2 of 3 rounds. So, I mean, that shows you how soft a 3.5 birdie line can be. Ideally, we'd like to find an over on birdies here to mix in with this fade on strokes, just so that we can get the full payout. But I'm not sure we're going to find anything that would be plus EV. So I don't think we had a max home birdie line over there on FanDuel. Let me just double check that before we go over to the other site. So yeah, nothing in terms of a max home birdie line, but maybe they have one over here on FanDuel. Let's see. So yeah, I don't see anything. Yeah, nothing for Max Homa, but like a Sahath is -150, Decky's -175. Like, I know he's not playing his best golf. Like, we have to nerf him a little bit from where he would normally be. But you'd have to think that Max Homa over on birdies isn't the worst idea. In fact, if we take a look at his performance so far this week, let's just do that here real quick. So there's Max Homa. In terms of his event averages, he's about a neutral in all 4 categories. He's not playing his best golf, but he made 4 birdies round 3, so he would have hooked by 0.5. 4 birdies round 2, so he would have hooked by 0.5. and then 3 round 1. So he would have went under the first 3 rounds. Like, yeah, that's too sketchy for me to want to play that. So, and just to double check this, right? Yeah, Zalatoris went over in 2 of the first 3, right? Yeah, so he went under round 3, which that was all the putter, and then he went over, and then he went over out there round number 1 as well. So yeah, the Zalatoris fade, I definitely feel pretty good about. Yeah, this Homo one, not so much. He's kind of under it the first 3 rounds. Not that he can't go over round 4, right? If anything, I would lean on the over still over there in that max Homo prop. But I was hoping to see 1, maybe 2 rounds where he went out there and still covered that, but couldn't even get that out of max Homa there. So yeah, if we're trying to find that positive stance play, Justin Thomas is an option. I know we were looking at the sportsbook odds before. Minus 135 on DraftKings isn't anything to scoff at. This, I believe it was minus 145 or minus 140, something like that over here on Caesars. Just to double check, he was, minus 140 for his under over here in Caesars. Like, technically, that's getting close to that plus EV range, but he's also playing with the Sunday pressure of trying to win a tour event. So he's going to have to go low to win this. He knows that. It's not a U.S. Open. He's not going to get handed the win with something like even par. So I'm not against this kind of lean, but I do worry about the Sunday nerves coming into play. So we'll at least throw it into the shopping cart for now. The main reason being that we need a positive stance play, because if we were to go with 2 fades, I mean, just to show you guys, if you're not already familiar, they're going to pay you 2.5x, which is just absolute bullshit. And then I believe on Underdog, they also screwed up the payouts. Yeah, it's 2.7x. So I guess if you're going to do that, do it on Underdog. You get a 0.2 more units if you go out there and end up hitting, but it's not ideal, to put it lightly. So if we did that, if we were going to take this slip, we would be doing it over here on Underdog just because the payout would be a little bit better. So just to show you what that would look like, let's throw Justin Thomas in there. They have the Bulls Zalatoris prop up, I believe. It's not typing. So if we entered it over here, right, an under and an over together, it'd give us a 3.24x payout, which is better than the 3x that they'd give us over here on Prize Picks. So we're going to go with 1 slip over here for the slip. Of course, the rest of it I'll be posting over there for my Patreon members. What I'm hoping for, we're going to enter this over here in Underdog. What I'm hoping, though, is that Underdog will give us even more props like they did out there for round 3. It didn't work to their favor, so they might stay away from it just because I made them pay for the extra stuff that they posted. But yeah, this is going to be the slip that I actually enter. So I'm going to have to log on to my other account, go actually get to my exposure. But this will pay over 3x because we're anti-correlating it. You're getting slate plus EV value out there on Justin Thomas. And because Will Zalatoris is playing some sketchy golf, I don't think it's the best course fit for him with him not being the best off the tee lately. I'll take his over at 67.5. So this golf course, I think the pricing for it has been pretty decent to this point. And considering that Sunday pins are going to be a little bit trickier than what we had from round 3, I think some overs and some unders can be in play out there. So let me see if there's any last second questions. If not, we're going to hop on out of here. Can I show you Kevin Yu's stats? I absolutely can. So Kevin Yu, just to bring that up. So over the first 3 days, he's gaining across all 4 rounds. Hard to beat that kind of stuff. And then round 3 gained in all 3, but with the putter, that's bulletproof. It's hard to argue with that kind of stat profile. There's a birdie or better with Willie Z and Homa on Prize Picks. Yeah, that's close. I'd rather have Max Homa than Will Zalatoris, but that's a pretty close one for me. And you're saying Will Zalatoris versus Homa? Yeah, you're saying you'd rather have Homa? I think I would too, but I think that's pretty close. How about Fowler under strokes at 68 strokes? He's playing solid golf. I think he's going to have a solid round 4. So yeah, if you were looking for another positive stance play, I think that would make sense. And like if you're looking at the sportsbook odds, he's minus 170 for the under. So obviously he's 0.5 lower than that kind of line, but he's in the kind of juice at that point where they might move this down to 67.5. So I like that. I would co-sign that, Blake. And you said thoughts on CT? He's playing really well in approach, but I worry about the form heading in. He had lost in 3 of his last 5 events. Alrighty, guys, that's all I've got though. I've got to get to the restroom here. Been holding off on it for quite some time. But best of luck out there with all of your exposure for this evening. Whether it's over there for PGA, Eurogolf, I'll probably be looking at that board here in a little bit as well. But make sure to check out the Patreon page for all the behind the scenes content, as I was mentioning before. The spreadsheet with all my projections and player pool exposure on it, as well as all the different prop slips that I'm entering as well. All of that will be posted over there for my Patreon members, and a lot of it already has been posted over there for my Patreon members. But hopefully it's a good end to the week for us, all of us out there. Go down, try and take down a GBP or two for me. Go out there, try and cash out on a few of your prop slips. Best of luck with all that exposure, and let's get after it for the rest of the fall swing as well. Smash the like button if you guys haven't already. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come, including the rest of the fall swing and our Week 8 main slate video, which will be dropping for NFL this afternoon. So keep an eye out for that. Best of luck with all of what you're doing for golf, and let's get after it.